Language, of course, is an ideal vehicle to understand people's culture, I mean, the way people behave, interact with others, and of course also the history. So the history of a people and cultural history is very tightly connected to linguistic history. And the case of Swahili is certainly a case in point. So it's both instructive and interesting and fascinating in a way to look at the history of the language a little bit more detail. The history of Swahili is a fascinating story, spanning some 1200 years from the East African coast to its present use as the language of wider communication in East Africa. And it's a global language. In the next couple of slides, we're going to trace that history through more than 1,000 years. The 1,200 years of the history of Swahili can be divided into 4 different parts. From 800 Common Era to today, Swahili served as a coastal language at the beginning, then was used along the trade routes to the interior of the East African continent, then expanded also under the colonial administration, and finally is the language of wider communication of East Africa. Before looking at the history of Swahili proper, it's worthwhile going back a bit further and look at the pre-history of Swahili, if you like, the ancient history. It was said some time ago in the 19th and early 20th century that Africa didn't have history, but that's of course as wrong as you can get. There's plenty of history in Africa and plenty of histories in Africa. And one of these histories is the history of the Bantu languages. Swahili is a Bantu language belonging to a large family of some 450 languages. And the origins of this family lie in West Africa, in today's Cameroon, and can be traced back to about 5,000 years ago. From the original location of the Bantu languages, slowly, the Bantu languages expanded through a process of movement of speakers, through social innovation, economic innovation, patterns of language shift and multilingualism, slowly expanding southwards and eastwards, reaching the East African coast some 2,000 years ago. We can talk about the history of Swahili proper from about 800 AD. At that stage, an early form of Swahili was established on the coast and then became the language of the entire coast as the language of a mercantile, seafaring, urban Muslim society. There was a link with Islam. It was a city-based language. There were trading port cities along the coast, Lamu, Mombasa, Kilwa, and trading on dhows. Swahili traders used the monsoon winds to trade southwards for about half a year and then northwards again for about half a year. And by 1100 AD, Swahili was used from southern Somalia down to northern Mozambique and the Comoro Islands. It was also a time from then and onwards where Swahili culture and literature blossomed. So here's a famous example of 19th century Swahili poetry and an outstanding example of Swahili and African literature, and that is the Al-Inkishafi, the Soul's Awakening, as it has been translated by Sayyid Abdallah bin Ali bin Nasir. Like all early Swahili literature, the poem is written in Arabic script, sometimes called Ajami. And reading this poetry, like the Al-Inkishafi, is an art form. SOAS archive holds rare recordings of the performance of this poem and other classical Swahili poems by the famous Swahili scholar Sheikh Yahya Ali Omar. So here is the first few stanzas of the Al-Inkishafi. On the top, we see the original classical Swahili, which is quite different from modern standard Swahili. So the middle part is the standard Swahili version of it provided by Poetry Kenya. And then there's an English translation at the bottom. And I'm going to play Sheikh Yahya performing this beginning.
hali ya kuchunga hino nudhumu na Rahmani kirasimu na basi Arrahimi nyuma ikae.
We have a lot of scholarship on these old Swahili poems, and there is still a lot of work being done. It's a very active and fascinating research area. The next stage in the history of Swahili is the inland trade routes and the colonial administration, and I should have said also resistance to colonial administration. In the 19th century, Swahili traders and Arab traders established trade routes from the coast into the interior, trading ivory, spices, and also being involved in the slave trade. These trade routes ran from coastal towns like Mombasa, Bagamoyo, and Kilwa, westwards into the interior, reaching Uganda, Western Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, as well as the today's Eastern DRC. Along these trade routes, Swahili was used and then became established in towns and cities like Tabora, Uditi, or Lubumbashi. Around the same time, we also see the appearance of Christian missionaries from Europe, and in their way, colonial administration, but also then resistance to that administration. And all these three dynamics are related in many ways to Swahili language. So from the late 19th to the mid 20th century, East Africa was governed by different colonial powers: English, German, Belgian, Portuguese. Swahili was increasingly used as a language of education and administration. And we also see the development of Swahili writing in Roman scripts by Christian missionaries who would use Swahili for Bible translations. However, Swahili was also used in resistance to colonial power, most notably in the Maji Maji, or Amaji, the Swahili word for water, of 1905 to 1907, where in particular southern Tanzania, a number of ethnic groups united to resist German colonial administration. And in that movement, Swahili was used for cross-ethnic communication, which was later used in independent language policy to show the pedigree of Swahili as an anti-colonial and cross-community language.
A good attestation for the spread of Swahili, even in the 19th century, comes from a contemporary witness, Johanna Barnabas Abdallah, who was the author of one of the earliest histories of the Yao, an ethnic group in southern Tanzania, Malawi, and Mozambique. And Abdallah was trained by the university's mission to Central Africa, and he writes in 1894, when he was in Zanzibar at the Kiungani School, the university mission society had set up there. He says that we are so many boys in this house of different tribes, Yaos, Makuas, Bondes, and Nyasas, but we all speak Swahili language. So that already showed that Swahili was used as a language of wider communication across different ethnic groups and linguistics groups in Tanzania and indeed in Eastern Africa.
Today, Swahili is the language of East Africa, used for wider communication in all public domains, and widely spoken throughout the region. After independence, Swahili became the national and official language in several East African countries, in Tanzania, Kenya, later on Uganda. It is widespread in education, media, and public discourse, and there's a rich tradition of literature, music, and popular culture. And then in the 21st century, we see Swahili becoming a Pan-African and indeed a global language, reaching beyond both the coastal areas and indeed the East African mainland to wider audiences. Here are some visual impressions of the appeal and use in Swahili. On the top, we have an advertisement from Tanzania for a mobile phone company, and it says Lugha yetu, fahari yetu, our language, our pride. And it plays both with the Tanzanian national flag and national colors, and the use of Swahili as a symbol of national identity. At the bottom, we see the use of Sheng, an urban youth language starting to be used in Kenya some decades ago now, and currently very, very popular. And here we see the Sheng word chapa in an advertisement for a cash machine ATM. So it says Pata chapa around the corner. We have standard Swahili Pata to get then the Sheng word for money, and then English showing how Sheng has been integrated into mainstream language use in Kenya. And that's an example of the versatility of Swahili in adopting different forms and lexis. The top image shows bilingual signage at Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Kenya. And the bottom picture shows the renowned Swahili scholar, Professor Clara Mumanji, who is delivering a keynote address at the International Conference of Chakita, the Chama cha Kiswahili cha Taifa, the National Kiswahili Association of Kenya, showing the wide academic interest and active research being conducted on Swahili. This now takes us beyond East Africa and showing the global spread of Swahili. These are some countries where Swahili is taught at university level. So it shows that we have Swahili teaching in North America, in many places in Europe, in China and Japan, in Asia, in East Africa, of course, but also in Africa beyond East Africa, for example, in Ghana and South Africa. And of course, we teach Swahili at SOAS as well. Here's a snapshot of our Swahili 1A module. It remains our most popular African language and one of our most popular languages across the school. And we have several teaching modules and also lively research environments and seminars.
Stepping back from the details a little bit and looking at the history of the Swahili language, it is indeed a remarkable story. Starting from a language spoken along the coast to becoming certainly the most important language in East Africa, an official national language in several countries, and indeed a global language. Swahili is taught at universities in North America, in Europe, Asia, and several African countries. It's an astounding development over the last 1,200 years. Now, we can ask ourselves what's behind that? What are the factors accounting for this development? And there's a number of features maybe which come to mind. The first one is that Swahili for a very long time has been associated with trade. So it was trade, Indian Ocean trade along the monsoon winds when Swahili spread across the East African coast along the city-states. And it was trade which then led to the use on the continent through trade routes up to Uganda, Western Tanzania, the present-day DRC. So trade always has been historically a driver of language spread. Languages associated with trade and business are good languages to speak. And the other element maybe is the absence of strong political power. Now the Swahili always have been very important traders, very important to commercial people. There was important cities, but there never was a big Swahili empire which was in competition with other people. So adopting Swahili as a language of wider communication didn't mean supporting a big political superstructure, which, in many cases people might have been reluctant to, been afraid of, apprehensive of. There's many cases in certain African contexts where that happened, where a national language is eyed and suspiciously by minority languages because of the associated political power, but that for Swahili, that wasn't really the case. So the positive influence of trade, if you like, and then the absence of political threat on the other hand, were both very positive factors for the spread of Swahili over the last 100 years. And the third element, which is important, I think, is the ability of Swahili to adapt to different cultures, religions, political ideas. It's an ideological versatility which has served the language very, very well over the last 100 years. so historically associated very much with Islam. The coast is very Islamic. A lot of Swahili literature is influenced by Islam, and there's an interesting blend of African and Islamic elements. But then Swahili was used for Christian missionaries, by Christian missionaries, to spread Christianity, and has been adopted by many Christian congregations. There's lots of Bible translations into Swahili. And more recently, it's been strongly associated with in Tanzania at least, with Ujamaa, the political ideology of after independence associated with President Nyerere, sometimes translated as African socialism. So that's a very different set of ideas, a different set of proponents of these ideas. But in any case, in all these cases, Swahili was very useful and was uncritically, if you like, adopted as a vehicle to promote these ideas. And the final element might be associated with this ideological versatility is the ability of the language and the willingness of the language to adopt loanwords, like English, which has thrived really on including and appropriating and using lots of lexical resources beyond the own narrow confines. Swahili has loanwords and lexical material from Arabic, from Hindi, from Gujarati, lots of South Asian languages, of course, from English, but also from German, from Portuguese. And through that, and indeed from many African languages, and through that has managed to enrich its vocabulary and the lexical structure and the expressiveness to an astounding effect. And I think all these different elements have contributed to the continuous popularity of Swahili and the result at the end of the day, which we see today as a global language.
With this, we have concluded our short survey of Swahili history. I hope it was enjoyable, and I hope we can continue talking about different aspects of Swahili at some future occasion. Shukrani and thank you.